The people who hurt you are never the ones you expect, I whispered to myself as I stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror. The fluorescent light above me buzzed softly, casting a pale glow across my face and illuminating the faint discoloration on my left wrist. I pulled my sleeve down immediately, covering it before anyone could see. The fabric brushed against my skin, and I forced myself to take a slow breath. It was 6:30 in the morning, and the diner had not even opened yet. Outside, the streets of Chicago were still waking up. Delivery trucks rolled past the windows. A city bus hissed to a stop half a block away. The sky was painted in shades of gray and gold as the first sunlight crept between the buildings. I grabbed my apron and stepped back into the dining room. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Bacon sizzled in the kitchen. Plates clattered somewhere behind me as the cooks prepared for the breakfast rush. Everything felt normal. That was the strange thing about pain. The world kept moving even when yours felt frozen. I moved from table to table setting silverware and refilling sugar containers. My hands worked automatically while my thoughts drifted elsewhere. The bruise beneath my sleeve seemed to burn with every movement. A reminder. A warning. A secret. The bell above the front door chimed sharply. I looked up. We were not technically open yet. A tall man stepped inside. For a moment the entire room felt smaller. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a perfectly tailored suit. His dark hair was neatly styled back. Sharp features. Pale skin. Ice blue eyes that seemed capable of seeing far more than they should. He paused near the entrance, quietly surveying the diner before choosing a booth near the window. There was something about him that immediately made everyone notice. Not because he demanded attention, because he never needed to. He carried authority the way other people carried wallets or keys. Naturally. Effortlessly. I looked away first. The kitchen doors swung open behind me. Customers began arriving. Within 20 minutes the diner was full of conversation, laughter, and the sound of coffee cups meeting tabletops. I moved through the crowd carrying trays and taking orders, trying to focus on work. Yet every time I glanced toward the corner booth, I found those ice blue eyes watching. Not staring. Observing. Measuring. Noticing. It should have made me uncomfortable. Instead, it made me nervous in a way I could not explain. Around 9 o'clock, a customer accidentally knocked a spoon onto the floor beside his table. I bent down automatically to pick it up. My sleeve slipped back an inch. Just an inch. It was enough. I saw it happen. His eyes dropped to my wrist. The faint bruise. Then back to my face. My stomach tightened instantly. I pulled the sleeve down and stood. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds. Yet it felt much longer. When I returned with his coffee refill a few minutes later, he did not touch the cup immediately. His gaze remained calm. Controlled. "You should take better care of yourself," he said quietly. The words were simple. Almost casual. But something underneath them felt deliberate. I froze. My fingers tightened around the coffee pot. "I am fine," I replied automatically. The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Not quite disbelief. "Of course," he said. Then he looked away. The conversation ended there. Yet as I walked back toward the counter, my pulse refused to slow. Somehow I knew he had seen more than I wanted him to. And for reasons I could not understand, I had the strange feeling that my life had just changed without me noticing the exact moment it happened. The rest of the morning passed beneath a strange layer of tension that I could not shake. Every time I carried a tray across the diner, every time I refilled a coffee cup or scribbled an order onto my notepad, I felt aware of him. Dominic Romano remained seated in the corner booth near the window, calm and motionless while the entire restaurant moved around him like water flowing around a stone. Sunlight reflected off the glass beside him, casting pale streaks across the dark fabric of his suit. Most customers never looked twice. A few noticed him briefly before returning to their conversations. But I could not stop noticing him. There was something unsettling about a man who spoke so little yet somehow seemed to understand everything happening around him. Around 11 o'clock, the breakfast crowd began thinning out. The clatter of dishes softened. The smell of bacon faded beneath the scent of fresh coffee and lemon cleaner. I was wiping down a table near the counter when the front door opened. My stomach immediately tightened. 3 men walked inside. They were not loud. They did not need to be. The moment I saw them, every muscle in my body locked. The tallest one smiled when he spotted me. It was not a friendly smile. It was familiarity disguised as friendliness. My hand froze around the cleaning cloth. I looked away immediately. Maybe they would leave. Maybe they were only passing through. Deep down I knew better. They chose a booth near the center of the diner. Close enough to watch me. Close enough to make sure I noticed them. My pulse began hammering against my ribs. I focused on work. Carry the menus. Refill the drinks. Smile at customers. Keep moving. Pretend everything was normal. The oldest of the three leaned back in his booth and laughed at something one of the others said. The sound carried across the room. Every nerve in my body reacted. I hated that reaction. I hated that they still had that power over me. My sleeve slipped slightly while I reached for a coffee pot. I quickly adjusted it. Too late. One of the men noticed. His grin widened. I turned away before he could say anything. A chill crawled down my spine. Then I felt it. Not fear. Something else. Observation. I glanced toward the window booth. Dominic had not moved. Yet those ice blue eyes were fixed directly on the three men. Not on me. On them. The entire atmosphere seemed to shift. Subtly. Quietly. Like a storm changing direction far away on the horizon. One of the men eventually stood and approached the counter. My throat tightened. He rested one hand against the polished surface and offered a smile that never reached his eyes. Long time no see, Hannah. I forced myself to remain professional. What can I get for you? His smile faded slightly. He clearly expected a different reaction. Before he could answer, another voice spoke. Calm. Controlled. Deep enough to cut through every sound in the room without effort. She asked you a question. The diner fell strangely quiet. My heart stopped for half a second. The man beside the counter slowly turned. Dominic remained seated exactly where he had been moments earlier. One hand resting beside his untouched coffee cup. Expression unreadable. The silence stretched. Then the man forced a laugh. No problem. Just making conversation. Dominic's gaze never wavered. Then answer the question. The man stepped back first. Not dramatically. Not fearfully. Just enough. Something had changed. Something invisible yet undeniable. For the first time all morning I drew a full breath. And as I looked toward the window booth, I realized Dominic Romano had been watching far more carefully than I ever imagined. For the next hour the diner seemed trapped in a strange balance. Customers continued eating. Coffee continued pouring. Forks clinked against plates. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon, tension lingered like static in the air. I could feel it every time I walked past the center booth. The three men stayed longer than necessary. They ordered slowly, talked quietly, watched too carefully. Every time I approached their table, I felt their attention follow me. I hated that feeling. More than that, I hated that part of me still expected trouble whenever they appeared. The sunlight outside had shifted, turning the diner windows into sheets of gold. Dust floated through the light like tiny sparks. I carried a fresh pot of coffee toward a customer near the entrance when one of the men laughed loudly. The sound made me flinch before I could stop myself. The reaction lasted less than a second. Unfortunately, Dominic saw it. From the corner booth, his gaze lifted immediately. Not toward me. Toward them. He missed nothing. That realization unsettled me almost as much as his presence. Around noon the lunch crowd began arriving. Every booth filled. Conversations overlapped. The smell of grilled sandwiches and fresh soup drifted from the kitchen. I focused on work. Keep moving. Keep smiling. Keep breathing. That had become my strategy for surviving difficult days. One step at a time. One customer at a time. Eventually, the tallest of the three men stood and headed toward the exit. The other two followed. As they passed the counter, one of them paused briefly. Take care of yourself, Hannah, he said. His tone sounded pleasant enough that nobody else would notice anything strange. But I knew exactly what he meant. My stomach tightened. Before I could answer, they left. The bell above the door chimed softly behind them. Silence followed. Not actual silence. The diner remained busy. Yet something inside me relaxed the moment they disappeared. I exhaled slowly and realized I had been holding my breath. A few minutes later, I approached Dominic's table with a coffee refill. His cup was nearly untouched. "More coffee?" I asked. He nodded once. As I poured, neither of us spoke. The dark liquid swirled inside the white ceramic mug. Steam curled upward between us. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "How long?" I froze. My grip tightened slightly around the coffee pot. "I do not know what you mean." He looked out the window. "Yes, you do." The calm certainty in his voice made lying feel pointless. My heart pounded. I glanced around the diner. Nobody was paying attention. Everyone seemed lost in their own conversations. "A while," I admitted quietly. The words barely rose above a whisper. Dominic nodded as though confirming something he already knew. And nobody helped. It was not a question. I stared at the coffee cup. For several seconds I could not answer. Then I shook my head. People usually do not want problems. The corner of his jaw tightened slightly. It was the first visible sign of emotion I had seen from him all day. Not anger. Something colder. More controlled. He remained silent for a moment before speaking again. Sometimes people mistake silence for safety. I looked up. Those ice blue eyes met mine directly. Steady. Unwavering. For reasons I could not explain, the fear that had followed me for months felt smaller in that moment. Not gone. Just smaller. Then Dominic reached into his jacket and placed a business card on the table. Simple. Elegant. No unnecessary details. He slid it toward me. "If you ever need help," he said quietly, "call." The word sounded less like an offer and more like a promise. That night, I carried Dominic's business card home in the pocket of my jacket. The small piece of cardstock felt heavier than it should have. Outside, the city glowed beneath rows of streetlights. Traffic rolled through intersections. Storefront windows reflected ribbons of gold and white across the wet pavement from an earlier rain. Everything looked ordinary, yet my thoughts refused to settle. I unlocked the door to my apartment building and climbed 3 flights of stairs. The old wooden steps creaked beneath my feet. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter and stood silently in the darkness. The bruise on my wrist remained hidden beneath my sleeve. Another marked my shoulder. Another lingered along my side. They had become part of my routine. Something to cover. Something to ignore. Something to survive. I hated that truth. More than anything, I hated how normal it had started to feel. I reached into my pocket and removed the business card. Simple. Elegant. Dominic Romano. A phone number beneath his name. Nothing else. No title. No explanation. I stared at it for several seconds before placing it beside the sink. Then I walked away from it. The next morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight poured through the diner windows, turning the glass into sheets of gold. Customers filled booths. Coffee machines hissed. The familiar rhythm of work wrapped around me like armor. Keep moving. Keep smiling. Keep working. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed something unusual. The 3 men had not appeared. Normally they would have found a reason to stop by. A reason to watch. A reason to remind me they existed. Today there was nothing. No messages. No visits. No uncomfortable smiles. The absence itself felt strange. I told myself not to think about it. By lunchtime, the feeling had only grown stronger. Every time the front door opened, part of me expected to see them. Every time it closed, relief followed. The hours passed. Still nothing. Then the bell above the entrance chimed. My heart jumped instinctively. Dominic stepped inside. The same dark suit. The same calm expression. The same ice blue eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing. He chose his usual booth by the window. Sunlight reflected across the polished tabletop. I approached with a coffee pot in hand. "Good afternoon," I said. "Good afternoon, Hannah." His voice remained steady, controlled, familiar now in a way that surprised me. I poured his coffee. Steam curled upward between us. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I heard myself ask the question that had been growing inside my mind all day. "Have you seen them?" Dominic looked up. Seen who? He already knew the answer. I could tell. The 3 men. Silence lingered for a moment. Outside, a bus rolled past the diner windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes rattled together. Dominic finally lifted his coffee cup. No. The single word sounded simple enough. Yet something behind it made my pulse quicken. I studied his expression. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Calm. Unreadable. That is unusual, I admitted quietly. Dominic took a sip of coffee before setting the cup down. Sometimes people make decisions. I frowned slightly. What kind of decisions? For the first time, something that almost resembled amusement flickered in his eyes. The smart kind. Then he glanced toward the window. Conversation over. Yet as I stood there holding the coffee pot, a strange realization settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt safe enough to breathe. The afternoon sun filtered through the diner windows, casting long golden beams across polished floors and worn wooden booths, filling the room with a quiet warmth. I moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and straightening napkins, each gesture deliberate yet automatic, my attention constantly drifting toward the corner booth where Dominic Romano sat. His posture was calm, composed, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the table as his ice-blue eyes surveyed the room with quiet precision. Every now and then, he would tilt his head slightly, tracking movements, observing without speaking, radiating a subtle authority that seemed to settle over the entire diner. Customers came and went, laughing, chatting, immersed in their own mornings, yet the atmosphere around Dominic felt different. Slightly charged, a gentle tension that I could sense even from across the room. I glanced down at my hands, noticing the faint shadows from the sleeve I had pulled over my bruises that morning, and felt a strange reassurance knowing he had noticed, yet had not drawn attention, had not interfered unnecessarily. Around 2 o'clock, a small commotion near the entrance caught my attention. A man with a briefcase stopped, hesitated, and glanced around nervously before hurrying away. Dominic's eyes flickered toward the door briefly and returned to me, unshaken, as if confirming that all was under control. I felt my shoulders relax slightly, realizing the presence of someone powerful and attentive brought an invisible safety to the space. I carried a tray of sandwiches toward a table of regulars, smiling as one of them complimented the new arrangement of the tables, and as I turned back, I saw Dominic stand, stretching briefly before moving toward the counter. He stopped near me, the quiet authority he exuded making it impossible not to notice him, and I felt my heartbeat quicken slightly despite my calm exterior. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on the counter, sliding it toward me with subtle precision. I picked it up carefully, noting the weight and quality of the paper, and understood instinctively that it contained more than just words. It carried intention, foresight, and a promise of protection. He returned to his booth, sitting gracefully, observing me as I carried on with my work. I opened the envelope discreetly during a quiet moment, revealing a card with his signature and contact information, a formal but silent acknowledgement of his attention and readiness to intervene if necessary. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the diner with a renewed sense of assurance, my actions imbued with subtle confidence, knowing that someone capable, aware, and calm was watching over the space. The sunlight shifted lower in the sky, turning amber as it spilled through the windows, highlighting dust particles that floated lazily in the warm air, and I realized that the diner, ordinary as it seemed to others, had transformed into a place where my presence mattered, where acts of vigilance and kindness intersected, and where quiet protection and understanding had reshaped not just my perception of safety, but my relationship to the space I had come to call my own, all under the calm, watchful gaze of Dominic Romano. The evening light began to soften, spilling golden hues across the diner windows and illuminating the worn wooden floors with a warm glow that felt almost comforting after the intensity of the day. I moved between tables, refilling coffee and adjusting napkins, each gesture careful and precise, my mind lingering on the subtle presence of Dominic Romano in the corner booth. He had remained calm, observing everything, yet somehow it felt like his awareness extended beyond what anyone could notice. Customers chattered quietly, the clatter of plates and silverware creating a gentle rhythm that masked the tension still humming beneath the surface. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life as the sky deepened into shades of orange and purple, casting long reflections across the glass panes. I paused for a moment by the counter, watching a couple of regulars sip their coffee and converse in low voices, noticing how Dominic's presence seemed to command a strange sort of order without a single word spoken. He lifted his cup slightly, acknowledging me as I passed by, a subtle gesture that carried more meaning than any conversation could convey. I returned to my tasks, folding menus, straightening chairs, and glancing occasionally at the small envelope he had left the previous day. Its weight in my pocket reminded me of the unspoken promise it contained, a quiet reassurance that someone was watching over me without the need for intervention, unless absolutely necessary. As the dinner crowd began to trickle in, the diner filled with a mixture of familiar faces and a few new customers, the aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling sandwiches blending with the scent of coffee and lemon cleaner to create an atmosphere both lively and intimate. Dominic rose from his booth with measured grace, moving slowly toward the counter, his presence drawing a subtle attention from the patrons who felt the shift in the room's energy. He stopped beside me, and for a moment we shared a silent exchange, his ice-blue eyes calm yet piercing, conveying a depth of understanding that did not require words. I offered a polite nod, and he returned it, the gesture speaking volumes about the respect and unspoken bond forming between us. The sunlight now had almost fully receded, and the warm glow of the overhead lights softened the shadows, making the diner feel like a small sanctuary from the world outside. Every action I performed, from serving plates to smiling at customers, felt imbued with renewed purpose, a quiet confidence strengthened by the knowledge that someone as observant and capable as Dominic was present, silently ensuring my safety and the integrity of the space. As I looked around, taking in the comfortable bustle, I realized that the diner had become more than a place of work. It had become a stage for subtle, careful interactions, where acts of vigilance and kindness intertwined seamlessly, and where quiet authority and trust could create a calm that resonated far beyond any single moment. Dominic finally returned to his booth, seated with ease, lifting his coffee in a small, almost imperceptible salute, and I felt the tension of the day ease just enough to allow a deep, steadying breath, knowing that under his watchful eyes the diner and I were exactly where we were meant to be. The following morning arrived with a crisp clarity, sunlight spilling across the diner windows and painting warm streaks onto the worn wooden floorboards, the soft hum of the city outside barely audible over the gentle clatter of dishes and conversation within. I moved methodically through the space, wiping tables and stacking menus, my movements precise, yet my thoughts were heavy with the memory of yesterday's calm but unmistakable vigilance from Dominic Romano. He sat in his usual corner booth, posture upright and composed, his ice-blue eyes scanning the room with quiet authority, observing everything yet interfering with nothing, his presence creating a subtle tension that seemed to make everyone else move more carefully, as though the air itself acknowledged his attention. Customers trickled in, some regulars, some new faces, unaware of the intricate psychological current flowing through the room, laughter and chatter blending seamlessly with the hiss of the coffee machine and the clink of silverware. I poured fresh coffee for a table near the counter, careful to maintain composure, but every step felt amplified under his watchful gaze. Each gesture, from wiping the rim of a cup to adjusting a napkin, seemed to carry more weight, more significance in his silent scrutiny. Around noon the light shifted, casting long shadows across the booths and emphasizing the subtle geometry of the room, the angles of chairs, the gleam of polished surfaces. I glanced toward the entrance, half expecting to see the three men again, though a part of me knew they would not return. Dominic's eyes followed my movement, noting the faint tremor in my fingers as I balanced the tray, the slight hesitation in my step, confirming that his observation extended beyond mere presence. He understood. The rhythm of the diner continued, yet under his attention, every micro-expression, every fleeting glance became magnified, weighted with meaning. I carried a plate to a booth near the window and placed it carefully, the golden light catching the faint curves of his expression, revealing only the tiniest hint of a smile as he observed from afar. Later, a soft breeze drifted through the slightly open front door, ruffling menus and scattering a few stray napkins across the counter, drawing Dominic's gaze momentarily, then returning to me steady, unwavering. For a moment the world felt narrowed, the busy diner fading into the background, leaving only the two of us within the orbit of silent communication. Every action I took, pouring, wiping, moving, was met with subtle acknowledgement, his attention acting as both reassurance and quiet assessment. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed a shift in my own awareness, a lightness beneath the previous tension, a feeling that, under Dominic's quiet observation, the diner had transformed into a space of safety, order, and unspoken understanding. The sunlight gradually softened into amber hues, casting warm reflections across counters and floors, and as I straightened a chair near the entrance, our eyes met once again, a brief, calm exchange that seemed to say more than words ever could, confirming that in this space, under his watchful presence, I could breathe and carry on, confident that the subtle balance of vigilance, care, and attention would continue to hold, quietly shaping the day around us. Sunset settled over the diner, casting long golden reflections across the polished floors and highlighting dust motes that floated lazily in the amber light. I moved through the tables, carrying plates and refilling coffee cups, each motion deliberate, precise, and layered with a quiet awareness of the presence Dominic Romano had maintained throughout the day. He remained in his corner booth, upright and composed, his ice-blue eyes scanning the diner with a calm authority that affected the atmosphere in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Customers continued their conversations, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension and care that radiated from his attention. The soft hiss of the coffee machine and the distant clatter of dishes blended into the background as I straightened chairs and tidied menus, feeling the weight of the day gradually ease with the knowledge that someone capable, observant, and protective was silently overseeing the space. A gentle breeze drifted in through the slightly open door, ruffling napkins and stirring the warm air, drawing Dominic's attention momentarily before returning to his composed focus on the diner. I paused by the counter, noticing how the sunlight caught the faint lines of fatigue on my arms, the small reminders of bruises hidden beneath my sleeves, and a subtle reassurance settled over me knowing he had observed without interruption, his presence alone offering protection and a sense of calm. The golden light intensified as the sun lowered, casting deep shadows across the tables and reflecting off the polished surfaces of the counters. I moved carefully, carrying a tray, to a booth near the window, and Dominic's gaze followed, not with intrusion, but with a quiet acknowledgement of my diligence and attention to detail. For several minutes, the diner existed in this suspended rhythm, a careful choreography of movement, observation, and unspoken understanding, the warmth of the light mingling with the soft scent of fresh coffee and baked bread to create a sense of security and order that had not been present before. I adjusted a chair and glanced toward the entrance, noting the fading sunlight and the soft reflections on the glass panes, feeling the subtle tension of the day dissolve into a comfortable, watchful stillness. Dominic finally stirred slightly, lifting his coffee in a small, measured motion, and for a brief instant, our eyes met across the distance of the room. No words were necessary. The acknowledgement in that glance spoke volumes, conveying trust, protection, and a quiet affirmation that the diner, the space, and I were under careful oversight. The remaining light slanted low through the windows, warming the interior with a golden glow, highlighting the interplay of shadows and reflections on the floor and counters. Every action I performed, from arranging napkins to refilling sugar containers, felt purposeful, grounded in the knowledge that the space was secure, respected, and observed with care. In that moment, I realized how profoundly ordinary spaces could transform under the subtle influence of attention, vigilance, and unspoken protection, and how quietly someone like Dominic Romano could shape the rhythm of life around him without ever needing to raise his voice or make a motion that would call attention. The diner hummed with normalcy, but beneath that hum, there was a profound sense of order and reassurance that stretched beyond the hours of the day, carrying the quiet promise of safety and watchfulness into the approaching night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the large diner windows, casting long warm streaks across the polished floors and highlighting every familiar corner with golden clarity. I moved through the space carrying trays of coffee and plates of food, each movement deliberate, precise, and measured, my attention constantly flicking toward Dominic Romano in his usual corner booth. His posture was as composed as ever, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the table, ice-blue eyes scanning the diner with the same quiet authority that had become both unsettling and reassuring over the past several days. The hum of conversation and clinking of utensils filled the room, blending into a comforting rhythm that contrasted sharply with the subtle tension under Dominic's presence. Customers came and went, oblivious to the invisible network of observation and care that seemed to stretch across the room, yet I felt it in every glance, every micro-expression he cast my way, every silent acknowledgement that reinforced a sense of protection I had never experienced before. Around mid-morning, A group of familiar faces appeared, laughing softly and ordering with casual ease, yet Dominic's gaze remained steady, noting their movements, their demeanor, confirming that the space remained under subtle control without overt interference. I carried a fresh pot of coffee toward a booth near the window and caught his eyes briefly. A faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between us, the kind that spoke volumes without words. The sunlight shifted, turning the interior amber, casting long reflections across the counters and tabletops, making dust particles shimmer in the warm glow. And I felt a deep, unspoken calm settle over me. Dominic rose slowly, his movements deliberate, and approached the counter with an elegance that commanded quiet attention. He did not speak immediately, instead letting his presence be felt, the subtle authority emanating from him like gravity, influencing the pace and posture of everyone around him. I handed him a cup of coffee, and he offered the smallest of smiles, a brief flicker that conveyed acknowledgement and respect, yet did not intrude, did not demand anything beyond the silent recognition of our shared understanding. Minutes passed with a serene wait, the diner continuing its rhythm, the world outside moving on while the interior held a space suspended in calm vigilance. Patrons laughed, plates were cleared, and the sunlight continued to shift slowly, painting long shadows across the polished floor. While I worked methodically, every motion informed by the quiet reassurance of Dominic's presence. Eventually, he returned to his booth, sitting with effortless grace, lifting his cup in a gesture that felt almost ceremonial, a quiet affirmation of safety and trust. I watched him for a moment, the tension of previous weeks dissolving into a warm, steady rhythm, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe fully, knowing that under his careful attention, the diner, the space, and I had been quietly transformed. The afternoon sunlight slanted low through the windows, bathing everything in a gentle golden glow, and in that calm, ordinary brilliance, I realized that even the smallest acts of attention, observation, and care could create lasting change, shaping an environment into a sanctuary where kindness, vigilance, and trust intertwined, leaving a quiet promise that life, though unpredictable, could hold moments of security, warmth, and subtle connection, all under the watchful, unwavering gaze of Dominic Romano.